This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and being the only one who can prevent forest fires really stresses me out. My co-host is John Pasden, and he once held a seance to see who ghosted him. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you here from Utah, stateside.
And I'm John Pasden. I live in Shanghai, China. Hi, everybody.
All right, John. Well, summer is upon us.
It's getting hot. It's getting sweaty.
And it's also time when a lot of people are out of school. And I will say this, John, in all my years, I definitely see that summertime is often a time where most learners seem to also take a break. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people, they want to go on vacation. They want to, hang out with family and friends, and studies can kind of get pushed aside for a little while.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's actually a great time if you are maybe out of a program, or sometimes there's traveling, there's all sorts of things going on. It's still important to keep those studies on if you're trying to work towards your goals. And this is a great time to have a tutor.
And, if you're studying Chinese, it's probably going to be online. It makes a lot of sense. You can do it anywhere. You can do it when you're visiting your mom in Atlanta, in my case, or whatever.
That's right. And I'll say this also segues easily into our sponsor today. And yes, we have a sponsor for this episode, John. It's italki, and they are a tutoring platform, but we're going to talk about them a little bit later.
Yeah. So today, first, we're going to get into talking about lessons, and this is most relevant to online lessons, although not entirely online focused.
Exactly. Now, I guess a question by show of hands. How many of you take notes when you have a class or a tutor session?
Or here's another question. How many of you actually prepare for your lesson and have notes written down in anticipation of what's coming, or to prepare for what you want to say during your lesson?
Yeah, asking that question, John, I'm like the kid in the class that's like kind of shamefully looking around and kind of hanging their head a little bit on that one.
Well, I'm the other kid who has his notes already.
Sitting in the front row.
Yeah, raising my hand, and I wrote out like 3 different ways that maybe I can express this, and I'm not sure which one is the best way, and I want to find out from my teacher which one is the best way, or maybe there's another way that I don't know about.
Well, thank you, Mr. Overachiever.
Well, language learning is fun, so get into it, man.
That's right.
So anyway, you have your notes before a lesson, maybe. If you're in your lesson, you're probably taking some notes, hopefully.
I will say I do that. When I have tutor sessions, I usually have a little notebook and I'll take some notes in there. But there are a lot of great tools these days as well.
Yeah, but because the question is all the learning happening just in the lesson? And then when the lesson stops, the learning ends? Because it definitely doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I sure hope not. And I will say, if anyone's been listening to this podcast for any period of time, I've interviewed well over 100 people on this episode. Nobody, and I repeat, nobody has achieved any decent level of proficiency only through classroom instruction or tutor sessions.
Right. But, you can maximize the results of your lessons. And what I'm talking about is after the lesson ends, there's more you can do. You can go over your notes. You can go over the lesson content to get the most out of every lesson.
Absolutely. And why not? Because you want to maximize your learnings. You want to achieve fluency faster.
Yeah. So, if you've taken any kind of note-taking courses, like one of the things you'll hear is that you can take your notes from the lesson and then like reorganize them and rewrite them into better notes. And that results in better learning. Or maybe you're just going to look at your notes and make sure they actually make sense, because you might have scribbled some stuff down. Maybe you were writing down some pinyin and you realize that maybe the tone's wrong and you need to check it, or you need to see what you meant by some cryptic comment. So going through your notes like pretty soon after the lesson can really help you get the most out of that lesson content.
Now, John, just to be clear, you're talking about pen and paper, snail mail, this type of stuff, right? Just typing out or handwriting some of your own notes. And we've got a lot of new transcription tools these days using AI and things, right?
Yeah. But, a lot of people, they do like to use pen and paper. And so these people can definitely get a lot out of just reviewing their paper notes and reorganizing those. But however, since you bring it up, if you want to use some more, high-tech tools, then there's a lot more you can do to get the most out of your lessons.
Well, that's great. But I think for us low tech individuals, who maybe we're just kind of typing out a note or writing it down, what do you think are some of the big things we should focus on when you're in a lesson or you have having a tutor session?
Well, I like to make sure that I always have questions for the teacher because if it comes from me and from some of my own needs, then what the teacher has to say is going to be directly relevant to me. So I want to do that. However, I also like to split stuff into useful vocabulary, useful grammar patterns, maybe some corrections. Like I tried to say this and the teacher said that was wrong and this is the way you should say it. So if you got it wrong during the lesson, then it might be something that you haven't quite gotten a handle on. So making a note of that correction from the lesson can be super useful.
I think this is a phenomenon that I may have read elsewhere, but I've just noticed sometimes, John, is that simply the act of writing down, like the correction or something like that, I remember it. It's not that I need a note sometimes to go back and remember it. It's more of like the writing of it actually helps me remember. I don't know if that ever happens to you.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, I like to have paper and pen notebooks for learning languages because that kinetic experience, I think it really does translate to more learning. Clearly, there are more high-tech ways to do it, but that doesn't always mean it's better.
So it also, I mean, the new words, right? If you come across something, a new word, or you did mention that, right? But just those things, like you can start making lists, right?
Yeah, so some people might want to take these new vocabulary words and like put them in a flashcard program, or some people might want to go super old school and make paper flashcards out of the words that the teacher gave them in their lesson, which is also very useful.
Now, I got to say, this is a great way to use flashcards. And I got to say, sometimes we kind of poo-poo, right, on flashcards and things like that. And I got to say, really what I'm not a big fan of is people just spending all their time doing that. But using it as a way to review, especially stuff for, like this, you're taking some notes or learning something from a class. This is an excellent way to kind of review that because you're not just necessarily learning them in isolation. It's kind of part of something more cohesive and more of a lived experience.
Yeah, and if you're going back through your lesson notes and you're identifying like, oh yeah, this is that really useful word, like you're confirming that I need this, and then you're turning it into a flashcard that you're going to study, like that act of organizing and confirming is going to make those flashcards much more meaningful. And then the review with them that you do later is more meaningful and it's going to imprint better.
Little side caveat too, you can also put phrases and sentences on flashcards.
Mind blown.
Mind blown.
Okay, so Jared, I think we've been kind to the traditional approach. We're not against pencil and paper. However, if you want to kick it up a notch, make it a little more high tech, this is taking us into the 70s and 80s maybe, you can do an audio recording of your lesson. And, if you're doing an online lesson, you could even do a video recording. You don't really need to, but just make sure that if you're recording your teacher, that you have your teacher's permission because, you don't want to do something that seems creepy or sneaky.
Yeah, we wouldn't want that.
Okay, so if you record the lesson and you have the audio, then what does that enable? Let's get into this.
All right. Well, I mean, recording, are we talking like old school, like a tape and reel?
I mean, it can be anything. Obviously, you're probably not using a cassette deck or whatever, but
yeah,
it can just be simple audio. Like for me personally, if I recorded a lesson, the lesson probably has a certain number of segments. Like maybe there's a vocabulary review or pronunciation practice or discussion. Like I'm probably going to want to jump straight to the discussion because maybe that's the part where I had trouble expressing certain ideas and the teacher gave me good feedback. So just being able to jump to the part of your lesson that you want to focus on that you thought was the most helpful or had the most feedback, just that was very useful.
We're going to get into like the AI transcription stuff, but one of the really big benefits here of having actual audio is you can actually hear yourself speak. Now, this could be cringe, right? I don't know if anyone has the experience where you actually hear, a recording of yourself, could be on video or audio. When we start our podcast, right? You're kind of like, do I really sound like that? Yes, you do. That's what you sound like. And sometimes you got to go back and you listen to the actual recording of maybe you speaking Chinese and you're like, oh my gosh, do I actually sound like what? And that could be good or bad, right? But it can help capture some of that pronunciation, the intonations, the tones, all that type of stuff. And it can sometimes help you contrast that. And you hear sometimes the examples, if a teacher was correcting you, sometimes it's easier to discern the difference and perceive the correct or maybe incorrect way, or identify some of your problems a little better when you actually go back and listen to it, as opposed to in the moment speaking it. And sometimes you just don't quite grasp, your mistake or whatever.
Yeah, I have a friend who speaks amazing Chinese. His name is Brendan O'Kane. And he swears that one of the most useful things he ever did for his pronunciation was to record himself speaking and then go back and listen to it. And, he also found it horrifying, just like everyone does. But it can be super useful. Definitely can be useful. But another thing is when you're talking to your teacher and you're trying to express yourself, a lot of the times the teacher will ask some clarifying questions. And sometimes they're just natural, like, oh, do you mean this? But other times they're doing what we call recasting. We've mentioned this in another episode. It's this thing where they kind of restate what you said, but in a slightly different and more correct way. And they're saying, oh, this is what we would normally say. Is this what you mean? And if you don't catch it during the lesson, and sometimes we don't, there's a good chance you will catch it when you go back and listen to the lesson afterwards.
Yeah, John, I think that's a great aspect of having that recording. It's like the cake is baked. It records what happened. It's not like you're in the moment, you can try to redo it or whatever. It's there. And so you have your successes and failures straight out there, and it's something you can definitely learn from if you take the time.
And one thing that's really useful here is you can go back and listen to what you tried to say that failed, and then what it eventually became that was the correct sentence. And that might be something that you want to write down that you didn't write down during the lesson. It's like the takeaway.
Takeaways, indeed. Now, this takes a little more time to do. But, as John pointed out, especially his friend, he believes that's one of the ways he really, really improved his Chinese. This can be a wise use of your time, frankly. If for those people who are really serious about something and you really are thinking like, hey, how can I really get the most out of my learnings? Well, this is an excellent way because John, if you're saying something in Chinese, well, you probably at least have an understanding of those words and the phrases of what you're trying to say. You may be saying it wrong or a little bit incorrectly, or maybe you didn't know a word or whatever, but you already are working with a context that you understand to a degree. And so, when we always talk about having comprehensible input, well, listening to your own stuff and interaction with a teacher or tutor, this is a ripe harvesting ground for Chinese learning, because there's going to be a lot of context going on in there, things that you are going to understand, and you're going to be able to not just fumble through it. You're going to listen maybe to yourself fumbling through it, but you're going to get a lot of potential gains out of that as well.
Right. And on the note of pronunciation, if you ever have this like recurring theme with your teacher where your teacher's like, fourth tone needs to be more forceful. You're not going down enough. Fourth tone, and you feel like you are, but they always say you're not. Well, if you go back and listen, then you might actually be able to hear what your teacher hears, even though you can't really hear it in real time.
Absolutely. So it's not yao, it's yow, right? Something like that.
Right. Okay. So we started off with, super traditional paper and pen. Now we moved into having the audio and what you can do with that. So then the next step to make it a little more high tech and potentially more useful is to take this audio and then transcribe it. And of course, you can do that by hand if you really want to. But nowadays, most of us use tools for this, computer tools.
But before we get into that, we have a word from our sponsor. And today's episode is brought to you by italki, which we did mention at the beginning. And this is actually a platform where we are going to be talking about a little bit in the second half relating to recording lessons.
So it is relevant. And if you don't already have a tutor, italki is a great place to find one. They've got over 30,000 teachers. No matter what your language is or what you're trying to study, you can find somebody and you can filter by price, specialty, availability, whatever you want.
And if you're a total beginner and the idea of fumbling through Chinese with zero shared vocabulary terrifies you, you can specifically filter for teachers who also speak your native language, so you're never totally stranded.
Right. That can make the first couple lessons way less stressful. But the real value is when you have this one on one teacher who knows you, understands you, knows what your goals are, and they can help personalize your lessons around your interests. Then the lessons are not like generic HSK lessons. They're really interesting.
And I would say that's I think one of the highlights really of having a tutor through like italki. You can have actual conversation practice with like native speakers. There's just not a lot of substitutes for that. And these substitutes it's not the same, right? So your listening adjusts, your speaking adjusts in the way that flashcards alone and some of these other platforms just can't replicate.
Yeah, and also practically speaking, it's pay per lesson. So you don't have some big subscription fee that you've got to pay up front. You book what you need when you need it.
Which is very nice for many of you busy listeners out there with scheduling, especially this summertime. It's flexible. You can squeeze a lesson in before work, at midnight, or in the middle of a trip or before trip, from your couch or a coffee shop or on the road, wherever works best for you.
So check out italki at italki.com. The link is in the show notes.
That's right. And you can put the promo code in for a discount. All right, let's get back to it.
Okay, so we're talking about taking the lesson audio and then running it through a transcription tool. Lots of different LLMs, AI tools do this. There's things like TurboScribe that do this. So you give it the audio and then it gives you text back.
And I think it's also important to note that it depends on how you are doing your lessons or tutoring sessions or whatever. If you're doing like a video call, I know like Google Meets and Zoom and many of the others have live transcription tools, and they will be able to transcribe both Chinese and English, even if they're mixed up.
Yeah, so if you're doing it after the lesson with some kind of tool, make sure that it supports both languages, because if it doesn't, that's going to be super annoying.
And we'll just relay this back to italki that they do have like a video call thing for tutors, and they also provide this. It'll transcribe it in whatever languages you're speaking.
Okay, so you've got your transcription. Then what are you going to do with it? Before we get into this, one thing that we should note is there's one way that transcription can be not as good as listening to the audio, because sometimes by transcribing you, even when you're saying things not perfectly, it's kind of fixing your mistakes, right? It can't like make notes out of every weird pronunciation thing that you do.
And let's be honest, as a non-native speaker of Chinese, sometimes it's not always going to understand you well, because maybe you sloughed that tone off. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily transcribe everything correctly. You're going to see some of the transcribed things and you'll be like, I don't even know what that word is.
Yeah, so it's kind of all or nothing. Either it transcribes it accurately into what you wanted to say, even though your pronunciation wasn't perfect, or it just garbles it into some nonsense, which is, it doesn't reflect what you were trying to say at all. So you just keep that in mind, that transcription has this little caveat.
But even if, let's say, it's like 95% correct, actually, that's actually not very good, but if let's say it's 98, whatever, there's going to be a lot of stuff in there that is going to be valuable and correct for you. That's going to be useful. So how do you make use of this?
Yeah, and especially if you're at intermediate or above, when like most of the conversation is in Chinese, it's pretty intelligible, then you can go through this, you can mine it, you can find maybe the cases where the teacher was recasting and kind of subtly correcting you. You can find that in the text. Or you can find the vocabulary words. Maybe the teacher said a word and you heard it and you understood it, but you had no idea what the characters were because you were just trying to talk. Well, now you can go and see the word with the characters in the transcription. Although you better look it up, make sure that's the right word.
John, as we're talking about this, something even just came up to me. What about corpus analysis? Haha. I think if you had a transcript and maybe you could somehow edit out maybe anything that's an incorrect transcription or something that's kind of messed up, but you could essentially analyze that and kind of run some frequency, or what are the most commonly used words that you're using in your lesson, and maybe what are some of those ones that are new or only reoccurred maybe once or twice.
All right, and what we're talking about really is a kind of small scale corpus analysis. Your corpus is this text of your lesson, and now we're analyzing it. So let's keep going to some of the other things you could possibly do. After you've already looked at the text itself and kind of pulled stuff out of it, you might want to do something that's a bit more like full lesson, comprehensive, maybe something along the lines of what Jared was saying, where you could use an AI tool and ask it, is there some grammar mistake I kept making over this lesson? Or what were the words that I didn't know that the teacher supplied me with during this lesson? You can ask questions like that, and it should be able to just give you these answers from the lesson, whether it's an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And you can have these nice answers, by category of whatever you're asking, just provided for you.
Yeah, it can be very helpful. I mean, you can have them break it out into a bullet list, list every time there was a correction, or list every time, this was discussed or whatever. And that can allow you to really kind of focus that review on certain areas or specific aspects of your lesson or conversation.
Yeah, another thing that I like to do is I could ask about what is something that I struggled to express clearly, and then how did the teacher kind of help me fix that sentence? And it should be able to give you the before and after versions. But then you can go further with AI and be like, well, could I have said this? What if I had said that? Is there another way I could have said this? And it'll give you all these answers, but then you can take those and then you can talk to your teacher about these in the next lesson. And the act of extracting them, thinking about them, maybe trying some alternate ways of expressing the same thing, this helps cement the learning. And then taking it forward into the next lesson does so even more. So yeah, AI is so powerful. And basically this can be a part of your studies to help you get the most out of every lesson with your tutor, help you practice, help you get clarity. And then with that, you can take new materials, new ideas, new analysis to your lesson, to your human tutor, and have better lessons.
And John, like you said at the very beginning, it could even help you come a little bit more prepared with some questions or focus areas. It can help identify some of that stuff that you could be able to focus on with your real live tutor.
Yeah, and on that note, it would be nice if we all had an hour to prep for each lesson, then another hour to go over each lesson. But in reality, a lot of us don't have that kind of time. So if you can record a lesson and then feed it into AI, this could also be a way to save time and maybe get some of the best takeaways from the lesson if you are kind of low on time.
Absolutely. AI can be a wonderful and amazing, useful tool. It's only going to get better. But I think at the end of the day, too, there's nothing quite like a good human tutor as well.
Right. There really is no substitute for a human tutor right now. And so don't forget to check out italki.
That's right. So tutors, teachers, highly recommend.
And no matter what your tech level is, you can get a little more out of every lesson. So give some of these ideas a try. Let us know how it goes.
Thanks for listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. I'm Jared Turner, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, alongside my co-host John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. If something in this episode clicked for you, don't keep it to yourself. Share with another Chinese learner, and if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and don't forget to write us a review. If you haven't tried a graded reader yet, this is your sign. Go grab one of our Mandarin Companion graded readers and start building some real Chinese fluency. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and is edited by Jasper Chua. And a big thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.